everybody, and welcome to another amazing video of DIY investing. I have a special breakdown covering the Bitcoin price. We have successfully made a new all-time high and have officially entered price discovery. Even though we're seeing a little bit of a pullback, I wanted to break down what this breakout actually means and where the price of Bitcoin is going to be headed over the next couple months. We're also going to be diving into the Bitcoin dominance, mapping out what the price is doing as we're getting closer and closer to this descending resistance. Are we going to see Bitcoin break out of this, or is this going to result in new all-time lows in a similar sort of way that we saw in 2017. We've got the total crypto market cap, analyzing what's taking place there, followed by the altcoin total market cap as well. Guys, if at any point you find value in this video, do me a favor by leaving a like, comment, and subscribing to this channel. If you guys do want to see how I'm investing in my portfolio long term, any altcoins I'm buying, selling, or trading over this cycle, links are in the description. Go ahead and sign up on my website to get lifetime access inside of my group. Right off the bat, guys, looking at Bitcoin, there's a lot of fear entering the market right now, and it's really centered around the fact that Bitcoin, has had this little pullback after we successfully broke out into a new all-time high. Now, even though we've broken out into a new all-time high, as it stands in the shorter time frames, Bitcoin successfully broke back below those, and it ended up closing below those as resistance. So if we jumped into like a 4-hour time frame, coming in here, we can see that we rallied all the way back up to retest these prior all-time highs, but we were unable to really break out of those, and we saw Bitcoin pull back right here. Now, as it stands, we're still holding short-term support, so nothing has really changed. We're still inside of the same range. So as long as we hold support here at about 66,500, I think that we can set ourselves up for a breakout back above this $69,000 level. If that happens, I do believe that that's where the momentum shifts, and we do see a reversal into a new high like that. So looking at Bitcoin, even though we're seeing this short-term bearish price action, that's to be expected, because when a market goes into a new all-time high, oftentimes you're going to have those initial sellers, just taking some quick little profit, because it's similar to what we saw inside of the last cycle for Bitcoin. If we come all the way back over in here, it was really this move right here that we started to see kind of that similar sort of profit taking. Right around that prior all-time high, we had this initial sell-off here, and then we got bought back, and then we saw another sort of higher high, but it was still kind of volatile inside of this price action. So I just want you guys to be reminded that there's always going to be those late sort of panic sellers that do end up taking some profit when you start running into a new all-time high. And I do think that that's more of what we're seeing right here. Now, in the shorter time frames, if we're unable to actually get back above the $69,000 level, basically this big red line, then I do think that that sets us in for a lower low back down to about 60K. So that's what I would be watching out for with Bitcoin in the shorter time frames. But as it stands, we've been so bullish up to this point that it's hard to fight the trend, especially if Bitcoin recaptured those prior all-time highs and then we actually go back into price discovery. At that point, I think that we could see a very quick buyback that really catches a lot of people off guard. Now, coming over here and looking at the Bitcoin dominance, we've only maintained support up to this point. As it stands, this market is looking like it does want to end up breaking out and at least going up to 58% dominance. Now, I was always anticipating that we were going to end up, closing below this, but I never wrote off the potential where we do see kind of one more final fake out, kind of the last bull trap, I guess you could say, before the market closes back down and actually does start this sort of bearish consolidation. This is what we need to see for the altcoins, and it would be kind of similar to what we saw in the last cycle, where we kind of were riding against this descending resistance, and then the market made one final sort of breakout. That was the last bull trap before we started our next alt season for the most part. So that was right before we went into that DeFi summer. Now, coming over into this next cycle, I wouldn't be surprised to see more of the same. I do think big picture, we're going to see that sort of shift happen where money ends up leaving Bitcoin and coming back into these altcoins, as we end up seeing the Ethereum ETF approval, as we'll end up seeing a few other different altcoins get ETF approvals, in my opinion. So we need to see this reverse in order to see, altcoins actually break out. So don't be surprised if this ends up being kind of that final shakeout before it takes place. Now, coming over here and looking at the total market cap, this thing had a very solid move. It actually outperformed what I was initially expecting, where we rallied all the way back up, retested this lower high at about 2.15, but then we even broke higher than that. So as it stands, the market has seen a lot more upside potential with the approval of the ETF. We've seen billions of dollars worth of volume coming into the price of Bitcoin, and I do think that that's an early indication that this cycle is going to be a lot more parabolic than anything we've seen up to this point. Now, when I'm looking at the total market cap, I wouldn't be surprised to see us come back down and retest this prior high, basically being that 2.15 to 16 trillion level. That would be what I would anticipate on the more bearish alternative. However, it wouldn't be surprising to see the market actually hold support depending on what Bitcoin does. If Bitcoin holds support and then we start making another high from this point, then at that point I think the market's just going to reverse. So it's really centered around what Bitcoin is doing in the shorter time frames. If Bitcoin is to lose support and go for a lower low, then I do think the total market cap is going to come back down and retest this prior lower high, right? And then that will kind of give us our final retest before we end up going into price discovery. So coming over here and looking at the altcoins ended up following more of what I expected with the total market cap, where we ended up coming right up to the top of this lower high, and then that's where we ended up rejecting. So in the shorter time frames, on the bearish side for the altcoins, we could see this come all the way back down to about 950 billion in total market cap. That would be this same level that we were consolidating on as support before we saw the Terra Luna collapse in the bear market. So when I'm looking at this, from the high to the low, that would be a decent sort of drop in the altcoins, looking at like 25%, but it's not too crazy by any means, and I do think that that dip would eventually get bought up before we make that next run to those prior all-time highs. But seeing all of this new volume coming in here, there's a lot of volume right back up there with those prior all-time highs of the, mania phase in the last cycle. So to me, that's an encouraging sign. Whether we get one more lower low or whether we don't, I just think that the lower low would provide another opportunity to get in at a lower price. Obviously, I honestly encourage any sort of bearish price action at this point because of the upside that we've seen. The market is definitely front-running prior cycles. And so for me, we just have more time to accumulate. The deeper the corrections are, the longer it takes to reaccumulate before we make the next higher high. That's what I really look forward to is, the opportunities to get back into the market. Some of us, are short-term traders. We take profit as the markets are breaking out. And I always love to compound my portfolio in these early times, especially any sort of correction that we get. We spent all of this time consolidating. I accumulated a lot of stuff, but now we've seen such a prolonged breakout that any sort of bearish price action I'm going to greatly encourage, because that's just an opportunity to once again compound these investments. Look at the winners that we've already had in our portfolio. What has front run the most in this cycle? What has outperformed? And then taking that investment and kind of going back into some of those and building up those other investments that have already done well. I think that that's the best thing that we can do. There's certain outliers every cycle, and those are always the ones that you want to consolidate the most of your portfolio in. There's certain bets that I've played inside of the market that have done really well. Layer 2s are a big narrative I think are going to play out. But when we're seeing the altcoins, looking like they could be at this lower low, we got to remember that it all resides around what Bitcoin does. Bitcoin is the driver of value in the market. If we're to see Bitcoin lose this support, I do think that we're going to see altcoins and the rest of the market obviously do the same. A deeper correction would follow through, but don't be surprised if Bitcoin ends up reversing over here, guys. We've seen the market really breaking out a lot with the rumor of the ETF, with the approval of the ETF, and then, all of the new money that came in post-ETF. Bitcoin breaking ETF records. This is an early indication that this cycle is a little bit different than the prior ones. I do think that there's going to be a lot more retail involvement, but at the end of the day, seeing Bitcoin make a new all-time high this quickly into a new cycle, this is definitely the quickest it's ever been, dating all the way back to the first cycle. It only took 850 days. So in the last cycle, it took 1,100 days before Bitcoin broke out and made a new all-time high. And then in the 2017 cycle, this thing was 1,245 days before it made a new all-time high. So, seeing this happening a year ahead of time in advance, I do think that this draws the obvious conclusion that we could be in a left translated cycle. I mean, I don't see any other, scenario necessarily other than, we are seeing the institutional involvement. We've seen the ETF approval. We now have on-ramps for retail that we just haven't had in prior cycles. So it makes sense that this thing is going to be more parabolic than prior cycles. The question now comes is it a left translation, or are we going to follow the normal 4-year trend? And in my opinion, we're no longer following the normal 4-year cycle trend. We've obviously started to distance ourselves into a much quicker cycle. So a lot of people assume that that means super cycle, that means, we're just going to, go for 3 years from this point, maybe 4 or 5 years, and just keep going up forever. And that's just not the way the markets work. Markets move based off of momentum. And the reason why some of these prior cycles have had such big upside potentials like this one over here in 2017 was because of the amount of time that it took to accumulate before that price discovery took place. Now we do have these new on-ramps, we do have the approval of the ETF for all of this new retail money, and the institutions are obviously here accumulating Bitcoin and have been. So big picture, I think that we're going to see a ton of new money coming into the market. The question now comes is Bitcoin going to end up coming into price discovery right now really quickly? Or are we going to end up seeing, a short-term pullback where we maybe come all the way back down to like the 48 to 50K level, spend a little bit of time consolidating before we do make that new all-time high. This would be the most bullish scenario for me, because if we were to follow something like this, where we're not really breaking out and making a new all-time high until, like, you know, summer to maybe even fall of 2024, the end of this year, that's going to be the point to where I think that we're going to still follow a normal 4-year cycle. However, if we just start instantly going into a new all-time high right here, even if we see sort of a correction in here, I do think that this is going to lead to an early cycle top, where it might be mid 2025 that, you know, Bitcoin peaks at 120 to 150K. It's kind of hard to say, just because of the fact we are distancing ourselves from the normal 4-year trend, where this is front running a little bit quicker in pace. You know, like I said, 850 days to a new all-time high. That's a lot quicker by a whole entire year versus the prior cycles. This one was 1,100 days, and this one was 1,245 days. So there is a little bit of a quicker pace with this one. And so with that being said, in my opinion, the way I'm looking at things is really resolving around how we're going to see the market correcting over the next couple months. If Bitcoin makes this new all-time high, I'm definitely leaning towards an early cycle top. However, if we kind of take a few more months consolidating around this Bitcoin halving that's taking place, you know, basically next month in April, that's going to be, you know, more relative with what we've seen with those prior cycles, even with us going into a new all-time high this quick. This could be this sort of, you know, fake out right here, a bull trap, before we kind of correct back down. You know, like I said, maybe we spend a couple more months coming back down, 160 days approximately. You know, maybe we spend a couple months sort of consolidating in here before we do make that new all-time high. That's the only real way that I see this playing out in a normal 4-year trend. However, if we don't take all of that time reconsolidating and we do sort of this new breakout into price discovery, that's going to be a lot more in alignment with a left translated cycle. Now, what we're looking at here with a left translation, basically you're analyzing from peak low of the bear market to peak low of the bear market, and then that's going to give you the 4-year cycle trend. Now, technically it'd be right here. So if we come over here, from cycle low to cycle low, 1,442 days, almost exactly 4 years. 4 years is 1,450. So with a normal 4-year cycle, we'd be looking at 3 years up, and then, you know, 1 year down. So you'd be looking at a cycle top end of the year 2025 if we were to follow a normal 4-year trend, which is why I say that if we follow this outline here, this red outline, that's where we're going to probably end up seeing sort of that normal sort of 4-year cycle trend, where we have this blow off top that probably goes to 250,000. I really wouldn't be surprised to see this thing much higher than even what I have drawn here, but it would be a little bit quicker in pace, right? We'd be looking at the end of the year 2025 as the cycle top, and that would follow a normal 4-year trend. However, because we're already breaking out and going into new all-time highs such a quicker pace, if we end up seeing a cycle top that is just, you know, completely different than any of the other cycles, we'd be looking at something maybe topping at the end of 2024, right? The end of this year, maybe even closer to like spring to early summer into next year, 2025. Now, inside of a left translated cycle, I'd be expecting something like this, right? Small pullbacks, but us to just really start ripping up here to like 120, 150K as we're getting closer towards the end of this year. And if that's the point, and if that's really what we're looking at with Bitcoin going over the rest of this year, I'm definitely going to be taking profits regardless of the fact that we're sitting at, you know, new all-time highs, price discovery, and we're front running at a much quicker pace. A lot of people are going to be more incentivized to want to hold through that. However, I'm actually going to be looking at taking profits regardless of us not following a normal 4-year cycle. Because what I want to see for Bitcoin, even if it would in the short term make our portfolios bleed and everything would go down, is this scenario right here, where we reconsolidate around these prior all-time highs, you know, kind of build this new trend before we go into that new all-time high. That's what I think would be the most ideal scenario. But even if we see this big sort of breakout like this, there's going to be a lot of profit for altcoins. There's still going to be a lot of life-changing gains. I don't think that that's going to change anything. The only difference is the amount of time that we're going to have to actually trade those. That's the thing that's going to change, because we're looking at, you know, the bottom of our next 4-year cycle being the end of the year 2026. So based off of that, if we look at the mid-range point between both of these dates, you're looking at 700 and basically like 50 days approximately. That's the mid-range point between the 4-year cycle. So if we see a cycle top like this, where we front run and actually peak on the left side of the mid-range, then at that point, what we're basically looking at is a left translated cycle, and that would be a shortened cycle. We'd be looking at an early cycle top, you know, all the way back down into a new cycle low dating all the way back at the end of the year 2026. So instead of a 1 year bear market, it'd be like a year and a half, maybe 2 years of a bear market, right? So that's what's different in a left translated cycle. If we were to continue to front run like this, then at that point I do think that that leads to an early cycle top and a longer bear market rather than the typical 1 year bear markets that every other cycle has been up to this point. So if we're to follow a normal 4 year cycle, I think that that's really where, you know, this sort of time frame plays out, where we come all the way back over, reconsolidate, get on the right side of this mid-range point, because us topping on the right side shows that we're most likely going to have, you know, your typical 4 year cycle, right? So that's what I'm really looking at when it comes to Bitcoin. That's what I'm looking at when it comes to all of these. If we're going to see a big alt season, I think it's really going to revolve around Bitcoin dominance obviously breaking down, even if in the short term this thing breaks out. But looking at the total market cap for the altcoins and the total market cap just in general, the market does look bullish, whether we see a lower low or not. You know, seeing the 4 year cycle playing out in real time, whether it's an early cycle or whether it's your typical 4 year trend, you know, at the end of the day, I think that both scenarios are going to provide a lot of upside potential for anybody that's positioned back down in here. If you've got a good portfolio already built right now, most stuff hasn't really moved besides Bitcoin and ETH. So now we're going to see the rest of the market start to outperform. Meme coins breaking out is an early sign of all of this. So I do think that we're going to see a lot of profit in the short term regardless. So big picture, this is just what I'm, you know, factoring in my own portfolio. This is what I see in the market. So I wanted to break things down and really explain what I think is going to be playing out over the rest of this year and even going into 2025. So guys, if you found value in this, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of these updates. If you guys want to see how I'm investing my portfolio, links are in the description to go ahead and sign up for my VIP inside of my website. From there, you're going to get lifetime access into anything I'm doing with my money, any portfolio, anything that I'm investing in over the course of these cycles. So check it out. Links are in the description. And with that being said, I'll catch you guys in the next one. As always, peace out.